Welcome back to the Journal of Samuel Kelly. When we left off last time, Samuel was just leaving Charleston. He spent some time there reflecting on how much had changed in the time that he had been away due to the war going on between the United States and Great Britain. Prior to arriving at Charleston, the Grenville had actually been captured twice. First by an American frigate, which turned out to be a less than formidable crew in daylight, and second, it was recaptured by the British, at which time it was sailed into Charleston to deliver what it had left of its supplies. We now join Samuel as he's leaving Charleston en route back to Great Britain in the Grenville. A breeze sprang up. We got underway, made sail for Great Britain, the man of war in company. During our passage, we perceived the Princess Caroline sheering about in an unaccountable manner, which led us to imagine the French prisoners had risen on the crew, but on inquiry found the wheel rope had given way, which occasioned the confusion. My station at sea was, as usual, in the main top, where I experienced much hectoring and uncivil language from the captain below, who had evidently forgotten himself, and never once during the passage home gave me a bit of fresh victuals or even treated me with more civility than the crew experienced from him, though he was even rioting on poultry, hogs, etc. About the beginning of July, 1782, we drew near the land, and as the wind was now got to the westward, and blowing a stiff gale, it was judged prudent to bear up for Plymouth Sound to land the mail and passengers. We anchored in the Sound about midday, and the captain, after landing the mail and passengers, proceeded by land to Falmouth, leaving Mr. Britton, the sailing master, in charge, to proceed home with the ship the first fair wind. Whilst we lay here, our officer went on shore to Cawson to purchase spirits, and I was surprised to see this contraband article carried through the streets in open day, as if in defiance to the laws of the country, and even the soldiers from camp on the neighboring heights were the porters to carry about the kegs of brandy in Geneva here. In this port, women frequently ply in boats as watermen, which I believe is scarcely the case in any other part of Britain. In a day or two after arrival, the wind coming fair, we sailed in the forenoon, and about 3 in the afternoon arrived at Falmouth. We found the Antelope, Captain H. Wilson, on East India packet, laying in Carrick Road, and on going on shore was informed that one of her mates had left her. Both the agents and shipbuilder being my friends, they each thought on me, and being applied to for this purpose, I was under the necessity of declining the situation, as I was not only bare of clothes, by being captured, but my father could not now afford to supply me, £100 at least being requisite to equip a mate for the East Indies. I have since seen the hand of Providence, in mercy, preventing me from going this voyage. Monsieur Linné, having now quitted the Grenville and assumed the gentleman, remembering the civilities I had shown him on coming on board the ship, gave me an invitation to dine with him at the principal inn at Falmouth, which I accepted. Having now no home, my father being at lodgings and a bedlayer, I was now under the necessity of living on board the vessel, and as the second mate was in the same state, we now messed together. My wages per month did not exceed 22 shillings and 6 pence, that being a seaman's pay in the packets and navy, and I believe our sailing master received no more than £4 per month, and this station was the zenith of preferment from merit, the captain being appointed by post office through government interest, and in general were strangers in the service. It was customary to receive 40 shillings per man after being captured, to replace our clothes and bedding, but this I could never obtain from the post office agent here. I began now to be tired of this service, but hearing our ship was ordered to London for inspection, I was determined to continue by her till I had seen the metropolis. Whilst I was in the Tyne, we had nearly lost a stout boy, who fell from the main yard into the sea, as we were running down the trades at the rate of 6 or 7 miles per hour, and a number of small sails being set, we were afraid to heave the vessel round to, till the canvas was reduced. A hen-coop was thrown overboard immediately, but we had run a considerable distance before the cutter was hoisted out, which providentially picked him up, just as he was exhausted in swimming. He had not seen the hen-coop nor the boat till she was near him, as the billows were high, though seeing the ship at a great distance his spirits began to flag. But the boat's crew kept calling to him to cheer him up, amongst whom was his elder brother. The tar brush which he had in his hand when he fell he kept hold of till he was picked up. Whilst we lay in Falmouth harbor, Captain B ordered 2 boats to attend on him at Falmouth Quay one morning. The cutter with 7 oars and the yawl with 4, the latter boat was furnished with a fishing net under the management of the gunner. The cutter was supplied with a cold collation. I made one of the crew of the latter boat this morning. Captain B brought with him a Mr. O.K., an old companion, and this gentleman had also paid me great court formerly when I came to Falmouth at the vacations from Helston School. But now he took no notice of having formerly been my companion. We proceeded with the boats to Malore Pool in Truro River, and there began to haul the seine and catch fish. In the meantime our gentlemen left us to walk up the village. They soon after returned in company with another gentleman and 3 ladies, which I soon found to be a party well known to me at Helstone, viz. A brother and sister of Sir C. Hawkins, Miss Robinson, and Miss Johns. This discovery was very mortifying to me, for though I was dressed clean and decent, I was now only an associate of vulgar seamen, and kept myself at a respectful distance in hopes of being unnoticed. They continued a while to see the fish caught, and then retired to a small farmhouse to get their dinner. From thence a message was sent from Captain B to me, demanding my presence to fry some of the fish. But whether this was by way of insult, or from knowing I understood the business, I am at a loss to determine, for he must have been aware that the ladies had formerly known me. However, I went to the house and informed a person that I saw there that it was my opinion women were better acquainted with cookery than myself, and that I did not like to undertake to cook for ladies. We now got the ship ready to proceed to London, and sailed about the latter end of July, 1782. A day or 2 after this, we got to the eastward of the Wit, and then bore up for Spithead, one of our cables being found imperfect. On running down to the Mother Bank, we passed a ship sunk, which we found to be the Royal George, a first rate. The crew had heeled her a few days before our arrival here to stop a leak, and by very bad management and obstinacy after the danger was intimated to the commanding officer on deck, this valuable 100-gun ship was lost. The admiral, with several hundred men, and I believe with about 250 women, were drowned, many of which, I fear, were ill prepared for an eternal state. The men of war near here sent their boats as quick as possible, and were enabled to save a number of the crew, who jumped overboard, but doubtless many were drawn down in the vortex of water. I was informed that a child was saved by holding fast by a sheep. After we anchored at the Mother Bank, our captain went on shore to Portsmouth and ordered a new cable. Whilst we were waiting for this, the dead bodies belonging to the Royal George floated and passed our ship, both with ebb and flood tide. Many we perceived on the shore at low water, and some I saw fastened by ropes to the buoy of a ship at Spithead. No reward being offered for burying the dead for several days, few people troubled themselves about them. About this time the diving bells were at work on the ship, and I went several times in the boat with Captain B to attend the process. There was a large capstan hoy fast to the masts, which we went on board, and here some of the boatswains attending the bells, supposing our boat's crew to be sent there to work, drove me to the capstans. At other times I attended to watch the bells going up and down, keeping a good lookout that I did not get the boatswain's supplejack on my back. The principal bell, in which was a surgeon of an East Indiaman, with a lascar, a native of Bengal, was very large, made like a porter vat, the largest end downward. Round this a quantity of pig lead was fastened on, to sink it. There were small round glass windows to admit light near the top, and a large hole in the bottom for men to enter, under which a board was hung with chains, on which the men stood. On sinking the bell, the water rose within, as far as the air pent up would let it, which might be about breast high on the men. In this small space of air they breathed, which was refreshed by the following method. 2 smaller bells were employed to go up and down in succession to supply the large one with fresh air. At the top of each a leather hose was fastened. At the end of the hose was a brass cock, which, when sunk, was pulled into the large bell by a line. They then let in the fresh air, and the foul air returned in its place into the small bell, when it was hauled up again above the surface of the water to let out the foul air and to fill again with fresh. There were also signal lines held by men who sat on the gunwale of the hoy, and these were led in at the bottom of the bell, near the deck of the ship. and by the surgeon twicking one or other of these lines, the man who held it knew what was wanting. One time, the large bell remained under water, I believe, 50-odd minutes, and when hoisted up, the air that rushed out was smoking. The Lascar went out of the bell to inspect the situation of the things on deck, and received air from the bell by means of a leather hood covering his head with a hose to the air in the machine. Once the surgeon sent up a message, written with a pencil on a clean bit of deal wood, and requested that the boats on the surface might not intercept the light of the sun from the bell. The hoy was crowded with naval officers from the fleet at Spithead, and the rigging of the Royal George was decorated, not with colors, but with dead bodies, who were hung up by arms, legs, etc., which presented a horrid spectacle. These men had floated at high water, and to prevent the tide carrying them away, had been tied fast to the shrouds and mainstay, and at low water, which was the time the diving bell worked, they were suspended several feet above the water. Some people searched the pockets of the dead while floated on the tide. 'Tis more than probable that, as this crew had just been paid their wages, that they had been the day before rioting in drunkenness and debauchery, little considering what a change a few hours would make. In the midst of life, we are in death. Our ship lay off Ryde, exactly in the stream of ebb that came from the wreck. We had therefore an opportunity of seeing the dead in vast numbers floating by us. Whilst lying here, the sight of so many disagreeables greatly injured my appetite. On receiving on board our new cable, we sailed for the Downs, which I was not sorry for. On our getting as far as Margate Roads, we had to ride out a tremendous gale there, and it was very providential that we had now good ground tackling in having a new cable, or the consequences might have been fatal. About the middle of August 1782, we reached our moorings in Limehouse Hole. Near our moorings I had a sight of a merchant ship built at Archangel, the size of which surprised me. Some of those ships are often 1,500 or 1,600 tons burthen, and at that time were allowed to be purchased by British merchants. My old ship, the Tyne Packet, being in Taylor's Dock, Rotherhithe, many of my old acquaintances came to visit our crew. The carpenter had been my messmate and invited me to his lodgings, he having been always very kind to me. I therefore went to see him. There he introduced me to a native of Cornwall, in the hat line, of whom I ordered a guinea hat. This hatter afterwards invited me to dine with him. On the following Sunday, accordingly, I waited on him, and after dinner he proposed to his wife to take tea with a friend in the Fleet prison, to which place I accompanied them, and on my being introduced, who should I behold but the boatswain's mate of the King George, Lisbon packet, with whom I had sailed, and he appeared glad to see me. His name was H. Pentyre, and having run into debt to the shopkeeper in Cornwall for his adventure, had delivered himself to this prison to clear his bail. He lived in his own hired room, with his hammock slung up on one side, and I am well persuaded he had on a shirt with ruffles. Here I inspected the premises, and found a very commodious coffee and tap room, with ranges of galleries to accommodate those debtors who could afford to hire the rooms. Those who were poor were obliged to pig in the common room on straw. There was also a yard and playground for exercise. This prison has since been rebuilt. Whilst our ship lay in Limehouse Hole, our crew used to cut off junks from the cable, which they sold early in the morning to the bumboats for pearl, and I think the petty officers had a hand in this nefarious practice. Here our cook, John Daly, an Irish papist, having drank to excess on shore, fell overboard between two vessels and was drowned late at night. Having hauled our vessel into Limekiln Dock for inspection, our crew was generally on the range, and many left the ship. A goat that we had on board here went one day down into the cabin, and ate a number of blank press protections, which she found on the locker. On Tower Hill I saw a vessel on wheels with masts and rigging, called the True Blue, which was used as a rendezvous to enter seamen for the Navy. I do not think I was overhauled but twice by the gangs whilst I was in London, as they could discover by my conduct that I was not afraid of them. Soon after his appointment, we heard that our carpenter and boatswain were in the police cage at Shadwell, being exposed to the view of the populace. Several of our people set out for the spot to see what they had been doing, and I followed. On our arrival, the carpenter appeared much dejected, and we found they had been attempting to sell a coil of rope belonging to the ship, and were detected by the police officers in the act. They continued in the cage till the next day, when our captain procured their liberation. The underwriters at Lloyd's, who insured our ship when captured, hearing she was in the river, requested that our commanding officer would send 3 of the crew that were taken by the Franklin to be examined respecting the captures and the subsequent plunderage. Accordingly, the second mate, steward, and myself were ordered to proceed to the house of Leslie Groves, an old captain of the Tyne, whom Captain Johnston succeeded, now an underwriter. On our way through Goodman's Fields in the evening, some lady standing at a door accosted my companions, like old acquaintance, and they promised to call on them on our return from the examination. Both my shipmates were Londoners. Accordingly, on our return, we visited this house, and on our being seated, a bottle of wine was introduced. But I soon found that I was in a bagnio, and began to be uneasy, though my friends, or rather my foes, appeared quite at home in this community. Seeing one of the females wasting the wine by overflowing the glasses, I reprimanded her, and took the bottle under my protection. Being quite at a loss to find the way to Limehouse, as I was a stranger in London, I continued here a considerable time, in hopes my companions would accompany me to the ship. At length, the second mate and a lady quitted the room, and not finding the steward disposed to go with me, I proceeded to the street door, when a female strove to keep me back by force, but I soon threw her aside and gained the street. These men had been 3 voyages in the ship with me. The steward's wife had come to London with me from Falmouth, and was now at lodgings at Limehouse, and I was informed he had formerly been one of the press gang on the Thames, and of course a man of no good principle. And the second mate was little better, having been several years in this low station, without merit to recommend him to obtain a higher. He afterwards became a penny post letter carrier at London, with a bell. On my getting to the corner of Great Prescott Street, I inquired of a woman my way to the ship. She replied she was going in that direction and would walk with me. We therefore entered into conversation and proceeded down Ratcliffe Highway. On the road she seemed desirous to recommend herself to my notice as a modest young woman, but finding I was not very desirous of becoming further acquainted, she bid me farewell, and I found my way alone with little difficulty. Hearing on board that several people were to be hung by Tyburn the next day, I agreed to accompany several of our seamen to see the execution. Therefore, the next morning we got to Newgate some time before the prisoners were ready to leave the prison. We kept close to the door round which a large concourse of people had assembled. By and by we heard a loud cry of "Make room," and looking on round, saw a fat man pressing through the crowd, with a large piece of bread and butter in his hand, which he was eating in the greatest hurry, and on inquiry found he was an assistant to the hangman, Jack Ketch, but seemed little concerned about the office he was soon to undertake. I shall just relate an anecdote of Jack Ketch and a seaman. A seaman, being in a public house, was asked whether he knew such a person, to which he replied in the negative. The man then informed him his name was Mr. Ketch, and that his employment was to hang men at Tyburn, on which the sailor had an inclination to shake him by the hand, and advancing said, "How do you do, Mr. Ketch?" To which Jack Ketch replied, "How do you do, sir? You have the advantage of me." "Aye," quoth the tar, "and I intend to keep it, for I am told you use those very roughly that you get the advantage of." We waited to see the prisoners put into the carts, and then made the best of our way to Tyburn, passing St. Sepulchre's Church, where the passing bell was sounding its discordant notes in the ears of the poor criminals. We got near the gallows, in the midst of such an assembly of people as I had never witnessed before, nor never wished to see again on such an occasion. The malefactors consisted of a Jew, 5 or 6 other men, and a woman, Charlotte Goodall, a servant, who let her sweetheart rob the house of plate. He was also hung by her side, but whatever might have been the guilt of those people, one of my shipmates in company, and who had been our pilot this day, was, I believe, as fit for the gallows as any of them, he being a most depraved wretch, and by his own knowledge of the intricate passages of this part of the town, I guess he formerly frequented them for no good. One night, when in my hammock on board asleep, I felt a cold hand on my thigh, which did not alarm me a little, as there is only one man on board that slept regularly between decks. I thought I heard the person retreating from my hammock and called out to ask who it was, but could get no answer. The ship was much infested with rats, which made great noises in the night. At this time, our crew had dwindled by frequent desertions to a small number. 4 or 5 Scotchmen, who were the most decent and orderly men, still remained, but these, on account of the wages being only 22 shillings 6 pence per month, were determined to go into the transport service, where the wages were £3, and they endeavored to persuade me to go with them, which I took into consideration. I knew my father had nearly expended the last of his property, and that in all probability he would soon want some assistance from my earnings, which at present were small. I therefore considered an increase of wages desirable. Therefore, having no home now at Falmouth, and no prospect of doing any good for myself in the packet service, I made up my mind to quit the Grenville with the North Britons, and accordingly removed my chest and bedding to Deptford, where the transports fitted out, and this we were enabled to do with safety, by having a protection from the packets. As I now left the Post Office Department, perhaps it may not be amiss to say something concerning the packets and their crews previous to the year 1783. I think there were 24 armed packets from Falmouth whilst I sailed in this service, most of which had from 14 to 18 guns, and 2 had as many as 26 guns, with crews of 60 men. Some of these ships had cleaned coppered bottoms, some had their copper painted over with white lead, and others had tinned bottoms, made of a composition like what is called tooth and egg metal. The first sort was the best for keeping clean, as seldom any marine plants or shellfish adhered to the clean copper. But on the painted copper, I have seen many barnacles, a shellfish, and on the tinned bottoms marine grass and shellfish grew as readily as on a wood-sheathed ship. I think I have counted 13 packets at home at one time. These vessels seldom rejected any able-bodied landsmen that offered themselves, as they were cheaper than seamen, requiring only 16 shillings to 18 shillings per month. These ships were, therefore, receptacles for a number of dissolute and depraved young men, who were either ashamed or afraid to continue in their native place in the country of Cornwall. These newcomers, having no home at Falmouth, were generally victuallated on board, in the harbor, and slept round the galley fire at night without bedding. There might have been from 5 to 10 of these in each ship, and these attended all calls in the boats. An officer was appointed to sleep on board at night in his turn, but this person frequently neglected his duty and remained on shore all night, making his appearance on board early in the morning for a cloak. The non-attendance of this officer encouraged the newcomers to land about midnight for plunder, when the gardens, poultry yards, etc. were robbed, one of the associates remaining on board to make a good fire and prepare water to scald off the feathers from turkeys, ducks, and fowls. They then boiled or roasted for their present use, and buried the remainder in the ballast to prevent discovery. A considerable number of the able seamen and petty officers were produced from time to time from this nursery. Deserters from the Navy at Plymouth frequently resorted to Falmouth, where many entered on board privateers and merchant ships. Others shipped themselves in the packets for the West Indies, with an intent to desert in the islands to the merchantmen, from whom they obtained 30 to 40 guineas by the run to England. Most of the officers, and those seamen that were married, carried large adventures out, and brought home in return contraband goods, which were frequently landed in the Cornish coast at night. I have seen our vessel laden deep in the water with this merchandise, and the captain has testified his displeasure at seeing the ship so much like a laden merchantman. A great deal of goods fell into the hands of the customs, as the officers searched every packet on arrival, and I remember one of the Lisbon packets being seized for having a quantity of tea on board. This dealing in merchandise made the seamen greedy, covetous, and scheming, and scarcely any trait of that generosity which is the characteristic of British seamen could be discovered in this community. They were likewise addicted to tippling, gambling, and purchasing goods abroad from prize masters and shipkeepers. They were also in the habit of plundering the wharves in the islands and in America, of mahogany, lingam vitae, etc., which they hoisted into the ship and stowed away in the hold in secrecy during the night. They pilfered the taverns in Jamaica of the glasses they drank out of, and brought them on board, and most things were fish that came to their hook. When a customer approached the ship to purchase goods, the sellers crowded to the gangway, each desirous to secure him to himself. On these occasions, the officers were treated with very little ceremony. In these vessels, the effect of original sin was to be seen in its horrid perfection, and I saw little or no appearance of religion or even morality, while I continued in this service, which was about 4 years. And I recollect once being informed at Jamaica that 2 of our peddlers entered the Jews' synagogue on the Sabbath with goods to sell, where they attempted to drive a bargain with some profane Israelites. If a man of war is considered as a floating hell, I am well convinced that a Falmouth packet, at the time I sailed in one, was far from being a floating heaven. If you've enjoyed this episode from the Journal of Samuel Kelly, please like, subscribe, and follow on whatever platform you're listening. Check the description to see how you can support this project and others, and tune in next time for more from the Journal of Samuel Kelly.